Hi, thank you for joining us for our special webinar on Outside the Storefronts, a guide to historic downtown landscapes. My name is Jessica Reynolds, and I'm Director of Office of Downtown Development at the Georgia Department of Community Affairs. And we are very fortunate to have two special guests with us today. We have Keys Williamson and Madie Fischetti. And Keys, I'm going to turn it over to you right now, let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about you and the company.
Okay. Well, my name is Keys Williamson. I am the principal at the Jaeger Company. The Jaeger Company is a landscape architecture and preservation firm. We've worked with Main Street cities across the state of Georgia, and we specialize in both historic environments and cultural landscapes, and we're excited to be participating in this webinar today. I'm joined by Madie.
Hi, I'm Madie Fischetti, and I'm a landscape architect here at the Jaeger Company. Senior landscape architect, been here off and on for about 15 years, and most of the work that I've done has involved historic landscapes and have worked a lot with Georgia downtowns and across the Southeast.
All right, so what we're going to do today is we're going to introduce information about the process of planning civic spaces and space making in cities. And we want to emphasize the importance of planning and the role that planning has in making a successful civic space. And we also want to encourage you all to think creatively about the civic resources that you have in your community. And we recognize that every community is different and every project is unique. But we're going to use three case studies today, and hopefully to illustrate the three topics that we are looking into today. Most importantly, we have found that early planning efforts pay dividends over and over again. And so creating a plan will help you with funding applications. It will help create an overall vision for your community, and will set the stage for phased implementation that is logical and cohesive. Lastly, we're not going to get too deep into the weeds about the intricacies of streetscape construction processes because we recognize again that every project is different depending upon the jurisdiction or the funding sources. But if you do have specific questions and want to talk about scheduling or something that we do not discuss today, please feel free to reach out to us and contact us, and we'll have our contact information available. So, Madie?
Okay, so the first item we're going to talk about are streetscapes and talk about how from concept to implementation it's important to keep the planning process at the front of your mind. And how a thorough planning process can lead to a more successful and implementable design. So just in general, what streetscapes are, most of you probably know this as Main Street managers, but I just wanted to go over just some of the basics about what a streetscape is. It's any area in the downtown that accommodates a pedestrian. So it's really anything between the drivable lane in a downtown and the storefront. And it's really what makes a downtown a downtown. It's the pedestrian connection between your different retail establishments, and often includes some things like site furnishings, nice plants and planters, street lighting, that's pedestrian scale, that's very important, as opposed to roadway lighting, which is a completely different scale. And it can also include areas for gathering. Something that we're including more and more in our streetscape planning are accommodations for bicycles. That's a kind of a newer front that DOT is stressing is Georgia DOT, Department of Transportation, is stressing accommodating bicyclists within the downtown areas. So we always try and keep that in mind as well. And streetscapes are really what help define the character of a united downtown. So having some sort of united elements helps the downtown read as a whole. Some of the goals that might be part of your master planning process are listed here. Some that I'd like to emphasize. One is livability and placemaking, making streets and downtown environments memorable and places to linger and visit repeatedly. Again, this is that character defining what makes your town different from everywhere else. Access and mobility. Most of our designs are trying to provide universal access, so that means anybody with a disability, older users, and again, bicyclists could also access your downtown. And then also number 6, healthy environment. I think this is important from both a green build standard, looking at ways to be more environmental in your planning with things like pervious pavements, but also making your town healthier for the people who live there. There's a big emphasis these days on the increase in obesity in the United States, so making your downtown a place that encourages walking and biking and exercise can help create a healthier environment for the citizens of your town. So some of the items that would be addressed in a successful streetscape design master plan are things like making sure you have a distinctive universal design that covers all elements, providing space for public life. Sometimes the right-of-way that the city owns is a lot wider than what they're using, and we can reclaim some pavement area, some place that's used by cars, and give it back to pedestrians. Pedestrian safety should be a priority. Things like visible crossings. This photo shows a crosswalk that has a different color. So a visual cue for automobiles that this is a pedestrian space. Things like bump outs, which is an extension of the sidewalk area out into the roadway and provides a safer crossing area for pedestrians, is important. Again, we talked about universal design. That just means design for everybody, not just able-bodied people, but people who have different modes of transportation. Ecology, there are different ways to incorporate stormwater design into your street. This photo shows an example of a streetscape that uses the vegetative buffer to incorporate stormwater collection. So the water's just not running off storefronts and into the street, it's actually getting collected and treated within the streetscape. So the case study that we're going to be looking at today is our streetscape planning that we've done with Greensboro, Georgia. Downtown Greensboro has been very proactive in doing a lot of master planning and always keeping streetscape kind of at the front of their planning efforts throughout their downtown. And we've been working with them for over 20 years. It started back in the early to mid 90s with the streetscape master plan that our company did. And that led to some T-funded improvements in the core downtown. They're always keeping streetscape in mind when they work on 5-year plans, and I think that's important to garner community support and to prioritize these pedestrian improvements throughout the planning process. So a result of their latest 5-year plan was that a phase 2 and phase 3 construction document package has been prepared. We're actually currently working on the phase 3 construction documents, and we're looking for SPLOST funding for those, and also going after a USDA Rural Business Development grant. So this is an example of some pages from our master plan that we worked on for Greensboro back in the mid-90s. The red star is their courthouse. The orange star is their festival hall. So those are some of the amenities that are downtown, but these two cross streets, Main Street and Broad Street, are the main streets in downtown, and this is their commercial core. So that's kind of where they started. What we did was go in and look at what was there existing and recommended improvements. And some of the improvements included things like street trees. We reconfigured some of the parking to allow for additional pedestrian space. You'll see on the right there's a graphic that shows a bump out. That's the area where we've reclaimed a little bit of the street paving and given it back to the pedestrians so they have a shorter area to cross the street. This is one of the first towns where we recommended something called root trenches. Root trenches is kind of a technical way of redirecting roots from street trees to be in a certain area under city sidewalks so they don't start to buckle the pavement. So this was mid-90s. This is kind of the project where we started testing it out, and it's worked really well and helped with the longevity of their street trees as well. We looked to local cues for materials when we worked on our master plan. The historic jail downtown that's in downtown Greensboro is made of Greene County granite, and that's something that we specified throughout the different phases of the project. We use that for the curb material and then also for some planter areas. Historically, Greensboro had hexagonal concrete pavement, so these pavers were used throughout their downtown streetscape, and we use those where possible. And the blue arrow is what's pointing. You can't really see it very well in this historic photo, but that blue arrow does point to the hexagonal pavers in a historic photo. And we've tried to use that throughout the process. And you'll see that we're even extending that into phase 3. So move forward. This is just a page from our construction documentation for this. Phase 1, so we had bump outs, crosswalks with visual cues for where pedestrians are crossing the street, and street trees. And then on the right, you'll see this was the 1996 newly implemented streetscape, and it's still there. So as I had mentioned before, the 5-year plan that the city did and we helped them with identified different gaps in the pedestrian network, and then also identified some areas where downtown was maybe expanding or where they would like to expand the downtown streetscape. And so once this got approved by City Council, we started moving forward with some of those recommendations. And that brings us to phase 3. This is where we're working today. We're working on construction documentation for phase 3, which extends the downtown streetscape pretty much in all directions. But one of the impetuses for expanding the streetscape were a few new projects that are happening adjacent to downtown. In the Mill District, there's a new mill loft project, a brewery, and also redevelopment of the railroad depot, historic railroad depot that are adjacent to downtown. And so the city really wanted to make sure that those amenities were tied in visually with downtown. So we took a lot of the downtown materials and cues that we use down to denote downtown and brought those down to the depot area. But we also are using some new vocabulary. So we're going to be using things like the hexagonal pavers, but since we're closer to a depot, we're going with a new lighting standard. You'll see lighting standard B, that's more of a depot style standard. We're going to use that to denote the depot area. Then we also have some different cases where we don't have a storefront right up against the sidewalk, so we're using things like a landscape buffer adjacent to parking areas to help give the pedestrian a little respite from all of the cars that are in the parking areas. We also have some opportunities for expanded planting zones, so up below you'll see the vocabulary of plants that we're using throughout those areas. The next project we're going to be looking at is a downtown park. This park is in Gainesville, Georgia. But before I get into that specific case, I wanted to talk a little bit about the power of 10 concept. This is a concept put forward by the Project for Public Spaces. And the Project for Public Spaces is a nonprofit planning and design and educational organization that aims to help people create and sustain public spaces and build stronger communities. So they conducted a study in placemaking, or what communities and their public spaces could do to make them more successful, and they call this the power of 10. So if you consider your city a part of a region, a successful, maybe one of the 10 successful cities within your region, then think about your city and what the 10 destinations might be in your city or where people want to go. And what this is saying is that each destination that's successful has 10 things to do. And this is kind of a range of reasons for people to come there. So they might be places to sit, playgrounds, art, a place for a festival to set up, or some place for an experience to happen in your downtown. So the project that we're going to be looking at that kind of uses this power of 10 is an underutilized green space that's in downtown Gainesville, Georgia. So there was a 2012 proposal by 3 different local Rotary clubs to add a new monument to this existing public space to honor public safety officers. And the goal was that they wanted to sensitively incorporate this into a final plan. Well, they consulted with our firm, and we talked to them about potentially doing a master plan, and they agreed to that. So in the master plan, what we did was go ahead, instead of just looking at where the monument was going to go, look at the entire space. And one of the things we like to do when we're looking at a historic space is kind of look at the layering and site history. So the graphic on the far left shows all of the different eras of development of this park. And some of the background and history of this park was that it was the original site of the city courthouse, and it was destroyed by a tornado in 1936. And FDR happened to be in the area, and he visited and promised WPA funds to help fix help repair the park or the square that was surrounding the courthouse. And that's when the original park was designed. In 1938, he gave a speech here and dedicated the square. And in 1964, it was also the site of another presidential speech. And then something that's more recent that has happened is that a bridge has been constructed over Jesse Jewell Parkway. That's on the south end of the project. It's this blue bridge that crosses, well, the graphic's blue. I don't think the bridge itself is blue, but it's the blue graphic crossing Jesse Jewell Parkway, and connects Midtown Gainesville with the downtown square. So now we're getting some new pedestrian traffic into this area. So it was time to start looking at this park and the asset it could be to the downtown area. So some of the site program elements that were identified in the master plan were that they wanted this to be more of a space for community gatherings. There are a bunch of different monuments here, and they were going to be adding this new one to public safety officers, so they wanted to make sure that it was still a civic space with that accommodated all the monuments. Again, that it was going to become an important connection between Midtown and downtown via the pedestrian bridge. And it also acts as somewhat of a quadrangle. There's a downtown Brunel campus that's in this area, and then also a numerous government buildings surrounding it. So it acts as a quadrangle in between several buildings. So we took a look at how we could design the space. Looked at 3 different concepts, and they ranged from a kind of open, looser pattern all the way through something that looks more like a quad. So there were 3 very distinct concepts presented to a user group, and what they decided to go with is one that has a more natural water feature. On the right hand side, you'll see a natural water feature, and that's where they're going to locate the proposed memorial. There's also a large flexible lawn space in the middle, and the city sees this as an area where they could potentially set up festival tents or a farmer's market. But all of the existing monuments are still accommodated. It allows for more flexible space. Again, there's lawn, multi-use space, trees, an interactive fountain, bioretention areas, so ecological measures were taken to handle some of those roof stormwater that comes into the site, and then existing parking within the site was reconfigured. So these are a couple of images. One is from the concept plan up on the left that shows how there's tiered seating and flexible space in the middle. And the right-hand black and white image is from our construction document set, and this is part of the water feature that's going to accommodate the new monument. And this is an interactive water feature. It should be fun for the whole town and a new destination for downtown Gainesville. I'm going to turn it over to Keys, and he's going to talk about cemeteries and other community spaces.
All right, so I'm sure you all are familiar with the concept of cultural landscapes and what they are and how they contribute to your community. You know, they obviously come in many shapes and sizes. Every historic community and historic property has a landscape component to it. They include a multitude of shapes and sizes and open spaces. They might be sidewalks in your historic downtown, or lawns and open spaces adjacent to your downtown that can be better utilized. And so that's what we want to talk today about is thinking about the different resources that might exist in your community that you can make better use of. I also want to introduce the fact that in working with a historic landscape, often, as Madie has shown in the previous examples, there is a thought process that takes place that might be different from working in a contemporary landscape where you don't have to be respectful of the past. At the Jaeger Company, we've been working with the National Park Service for almost 2 decades, developing the approach to documenting and rehabilitating cultural and historic landscapes. And so in many of our projects, we strive to understand what is historic about the space. And as Madie just showed with Roosevelt Square, the evolution of a space. And that helps inform our decision and design ideas. So developing this foundation of knowledge and information is critical when working in a historic site. Fortunately for all of us, this methodology, this process of working in cultural landscapes has been really well thought out and well developed. And it's articulated in the Secretary of the Interior's standards for the treatment of historic properties in cultural landscapes. One cultural landscape that is very often overlooked in communities are local cemeteries. For the past couple of decades, we've helped numerous communities across the Southeast revitalize neglected cemeteries. These cemeteries are often located in historic neighborhoods, and they're important physical resources. Not only do they offer a place of respite and reflection, but sometimes they're the only park-like setting in an urban area. Because many of our projects also provide an additional benefit that during the process of planning and designing the rehabilitation of a cemetery, we have seen over and again the coming together of community groups who participate in the planning and then work together to volunteer and adopt these cemeteries as service projects. And so it's an ancillary benefit of working with a resource in your community. But many communities are starting to look at downtown cemeteries, not only from a sacred burial place, but as an additional open space that provides new opportunities. And this is happening across the nation. The Trust for Public Land recommends utilizing cemeteries as a public space and creating a broader public awareness, not only of their history, but the contribution they can make to daily life. Obviously, that cemeteries historically have been significant open spaces and really kind of set one of the precedents and foundations for the entire profession of landscape architecture. The project we're going to look at today is the Gospel Pilgrim Cemetery, which was established in 1882. It's an African-American burial ground located here in Athens, Georgia. The 11-acre cemetery was practically lost to the community because of years of neglect until its recent rediscovery and rehabilitation. Until the 1960s, Gospel Pilgrim Cemetery served as Athens' principal African-American cemetery. It was founded and cared for by the Gospel Pilgrim Society, a lodge-type organization that provided burial insurance for the community. They oversaw the management of the cemetery until its last surviving member passed away in the 1970s. And in the ensuing decades, the cemetery fell into a period of neglect, which left the cemetery unrecognizable as a sacred burial ground. But it's a significant space and is the resting place for a number of locally and nationally recognized African Americans from Athens. But also, only a fraction of the graves were actually marked. So this became a very complicated project for us that required both thorough investigation in the historical record, but also utilizing archaeology to help identify the location and extent of burials. In 2004, the Jaeger Company prepared a master plan following the Secretary of Interior standards. The site was listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and in 2007, we developed a plan for the rehabilitation of the cemetery. During our research and during the archaeological phase, not only were we able to locate the extent of burials, but we were also able to identify historic circulation patterns and the evolution of the cemetery over time as different areas were actively being used at different times in its past. One of the primary concerns and obstacles to the rehabilitation of the property was the vegetation. First off, we needed to control the overgrowth that had almost completely obscured the burial locations. And so we brought in groups of volunteers, educated them about plant identification, and began hand clearing of the underbrush and removal of dead vegetation in order to clearly delineate grave sites. And it was remarkable how active and interested local service groups were and continue to be on this project. Another issue was just generally looking at the condition of the vegetation, and so we performed extensive tree assessments and canopy health inventory and analysis in order to begin developing long-term management recommendations for the site. One of the greatest challenges on this project was securing funding. And so we worked with representatives of our local housing and community development division to help secure community grants and CDBG funds. Also, a grant from the Georgia Department of Labor helped fund this master plan that we prepared. And a portion of the archaeological work was funded through our local SPLOST program. And so by developing a vision and a concrete plan for this site, we were successful in securing funds from multiple agencies. Part of the master plan and the goals for the master plan was to create improvements and improve accessibility into the site so that it could again function as a positive community resource. We worked hard to reference the types of historic materials that had been previously used on the site, so utilizing STREETSCAPE and local granite in order to help create formal edges and gateways into the cemetery. The rehabilitation of the property has been remarkably successful, and not only does it provide access for visitors, help preserve community heritage, and offer the opportunity to contribute to the tourism of the town of Athens. It has also energized the local community by providing the needed momentum for local groups to continue with the efforts of the ongoing maintenance that's required here to keep it as a place of beauty, a sacred burial ground, and a cultural amenity for the city of Athens. So, you want me to do this? So in conclusion, I think what we're hoping that you take away from this is that there are a lot of different public spaces in the downtowns across the state of Georgia. And you should think creatively, not only about how you define public space and take advantage of things like the cemeteries or the house museum yards or the alleys that exist in your streetscapes, but also have lofty goals for how you're going to use these public spaces. Think about that power of 10 and how not only do you need to have multiple assets in your community, but how you're going to invest to make those resources memorable and active and contribute to the overall quality of life in your communities. And lastly, over and over again, we have found that the communities that plan and the communities that create a vision for their downtown are the ones who get it implemented. Developing that vision helps you secure funding to actually get these projects constructed, but it also helps cultivate community support for the important investments that you'll make to have a long-term positive impact on your cities.
Thank you both. I was just sitting here listening and I was enthralled, and I love that everything you're talking about is always kind of what we're reiterating, you know, with our programs and the communities we work with, that planning plays so much of a role in everything that happens. And when you walk into a beautiful community, you know, it's a very rare situation where it just ended up that way. You know, there's usually a lot of love, time, energy, and resources that goes into maintaining that. And I have a couple brief questions, if you guys don't mind. So for a manager who's watching our presentation today and might be inspired to help take their streetscapes or some of their outlying areas and really try and take those next steps forward with creating these creative spaces for them or redeveloping them in a positive way for even like an area that's become overgrown and maybe a little run down, where do they begin? Like, what's the first step in the process of, you know, moving forward to try and, you know, work towards a goal like this?
Well, I think definitely just going in and doing a thorough inventory and analysis of the existing right-of-way. It may not be necessarily a publicly owned piece of property, but looking at the different right-of-ways and buffers that might be around a municipality. For instance, the cemetery might be privately owned, but looking at, you know, is that church still there that originally owned it, or is the group that opened that cemetery still there? Is that potential for city ownership or at least city investment? And definitely looking at some of the unused spaces within the right-of-way. We've found a lot of times when we look at a roadway, there's a lot of empty space next to it, or an area that might be occupied with pavement that could actually come back to the community and become a community asset. It could become a bike lane, it could become a sidewalk, it could become a median. So looking at what those right-of-ways are and kind of assessing where there might be extra space around a downtown. I think a thorough inventory of what those spaces are, and then looking at how they kind of spiderweb together and become a network of community assets is one way to start.
Yeah, I think getting a grip on what you have is obviously the first step, and then, you know, working with members of the community to find out what people want. So a needs assessment phase, and you know, there are, you know, other people in other communities that have gone through this exact process, and calling, you know, people like Madie and I, and if they have specific questions about something, we're always happy to help. So you know, it's not the, you know, a lot of people have gone to this rodeo before, and we've all learned good lessons in the past, and so don't feel like you're going to, you know, go into something blind. There's a lot of people that know how to do this and we all are willing to help.
I think that's great points. One more question. So if they've taken those steps, they've kind of done their research, they figured out what they want, and they're working with a company, maybe it's your company, maybe it's another company, what are some good things for them to keep in mind to help make them good clients? What are some things that you look for in your clients, that help you in the process of being successful?
Well, I think one thing is definitely having public investment, public opinion investment in the process, making sure that you get input throughout every stage of the process, and then making sure that whatever government entity there is, be it a city council or a board of commissioners, approves whatever plan it is, because then it's kind of official and on the books. I think that helps. Because I think we as consultants sometimes come back to that and say, you know what, you approved funding for this, and we'll go to bat for you on that if you let us present to your commissions and to your city councils and have them be on board as well as the public. I think the public investment is truly important in the process. You have any?
Yeah, I would say that we both need to approach this recognizing that we're partners in it. You don't want to just turn it all over to us, and we're not going to turn everything over to you. We have to work together, and so together developing goals and objectives, and together developing a schedule for completion, and recognizing that we're both going to work together in order to create a successful product.
I think that makes sense. Well, thank you guys so much for being with us. We have your contact information here on the screen, and as always, they can reach out to anybody in our office at mainstreet@dca.ga.gov with any questions or follow-up information, or if they want to be able to connect with you guys too, we can help with that process. I really enjoyed this presentation. I think it's always great to see best practices that other communities are doing. I find that so inspirational, and we're always encouraging our managers to take advantage of reaching out to other communities that have done great projects and seeing what it was like for them to go through it. And we believe that R&D stands for rip off and duplicate, not research and development. We're really great about sharing from and learning from each other's experiences, and I think that was the best part of what we learned here today. So thank you both so much for being with us, and we will have this up for everybody to view on YouTube.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.